So in case, what we've done is we've covered the first unit, which is primarily, understanding the importance of, strategic. It is the first part of the HRM unit, which is to do with the understanding what is human resources management, its role in the organization, and obviously, just overview of understanding, various aspects of human resource management. Now, once we've done that, what we want to be able to do now is, because you're doing a specialist course, which is to do understanding each and every component of HR and HR functions, we are now going to get into the second unit, which is primarily going to be looking at, understanding what does the HR, when we say they manage people, when we say they manage resources, which is people's resources within the organization, we now want to understand, how is this management done? What are the various day-to-day operational activities which the HR people get into with the organization? And what we want to specifically understand would be to understand how HR relates to HR functions, which we talked about, things like recruitment, development. We looked at training, recruitment and selection, training and development. We looked at unions, legislation, how each of this actually contribute to the organizational objectives, where they come in, what is the role they play, how they help in evaluating the performance and, evaluation in general. And then what is the relation that we will understand in this unit would be to understand what is the importance and the correlation of, organizational performance and management of human resources. So this unit, an add-on, is going to go into a bit more detail to the first unit, which we covered. This unit will actually be a more detail into going into individual functions of what we understood as an overview of HR and organization behavior. So what I've done for today's session is I've put together a presentation which basically covers some of the key learning outcomes of this unit, and we are going to go through some of them in a bit more detail for doing discussion. Once I have gone through some of the initial discussions with you today, there are lots of handouts which I'm going to send, which are key theoretical frameworks that you need to know as an HR person. So there's something like a 4 Ps, of change, which is required to be, understood. There is something called the Levin's model of change or change management, and he was one of the first pioneers who actually studied how change can be brought across, within the organization, and that is where he proposed that model. We will look at three other things which include, how do we look at tools which are used in evaluating, the performance of individuals within the organization. So in the previous unit, we only spoke about some of these tools like 360-degree feedback. We talked about, the balanced scorecard, management by objectives. We are going to actually now study them in a bit more detail, and each of these will be tools that we use as HR or people within the human resources to, evaluate performance. And we'll go through more detail. And then last but not the least, we recall in the first unit, we also cut some parts to look at how the organizational culture and structure of the organization, influences, the leadership styles within an organization. But here in this unit, we are going to be studying the correlation between structure and culture directly influences, people and resources working within the organization. So I'm going to send you a couple of handouts, which are going to be like putting the, meat on the bones. That means we are going to do the overview coverage of this unit through the presentation today in the session. And then some part of it would be to look at developing, greater detail by through those handouts and important theoretical frameworks to gain knowledge into how they are actually put into practice. And then, as always, just free to ask me questions where, you say, for example, do not understand something, or if you have further query. So let's look at, we've looked at what is the role of human resource organization. So human resources in organization, I've used a small picture here, which basically says, they are a department which manage people as a resources in any company, any business, or any large multinational organization. Now, the main role which HR is tasked with is to basically look at, once the organization has people working within the business, their main role is to look at retaining the staff, retaining the resources, and at the end of the day, putting in, steps, or putting in, let's put it this way, things which allow the resources to stay motivated, loyal to the organization. And for that, what HR is, they look at, in rewards, incentives, bonuses, and the idea is, in some cases, they feel that the potential of the employee, the employee does have potential. They sometimes also put training and development into place. So the 5 or 6 basic functions of HR that we looked at in Unit 1, we understand these are things that an HR manager would do. Those are the bits that we will go into a bit more detail when we understand, their role within the organization. So each of that we will study separately. So the role of training and development we will study separately. The role of recruitment and selection, which we will look at studying separately. And in this unit, the idea would be to try and go into a bit more detail to understand each of these individual functions from a nitty-gritty perspective. This one talks about, how does the responsibility of HR, relates to organizational objective. So these 5 or 6 points that we look at, we are going to discuss that into, more detail. Now, before we go to say some of the slides, a quick journal question. We know that what responsibility the HR has within the organization. Can you think of one which will help, let's put it this way. Let's take an example, or give me an example of a situation within an organization wherein you think the HR information in decision making. Can you think of a situation wherein the information provided by HR department or the HR manager helps the senior management in decision making or taking a decision?
I'm coming. Let me try to digest it.
Right. Okay. No worries. No problem.
I know the last. Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go on.
Yes, the last time we were talking about how HR helps in decision making, and I remember you cited an example that, for instance, okay, there was this company that you cited, and you said they want to lay off about 26,000 workers.
Yeah, BT. We talked about British Telecom laying off 13,000 workers. Yes.
Yes, workers, because I think maybe because the market isn't moving as it should be, and if you have more workers and productivity is not it's not what it should be, then you don't need more workers, because you'll be wasting resources. As such, you have to let go of some people and restructure the organization and focus on those people that would help build the organization. And all you have to do is just leave the key persons and let go of those who are not necessarily needed in the organization. So here, HR would come in to evaluate and, look into those who are competent enough to be in the organization, those who should be left, and those who should be discarded from the organization.
That is absolutely correct. So well thought of in terms of that example. So basically here, the HR, what they look at doing is the information that they produce, which is from performance appraisals, as you rightly said, the skill set of the organization that they produce, that, okay, we've got so many people as managers with this skill, we've got so many people or workers with this skill, and that is what helps the senior management make strategic decisions in terms of how they are going to match them, the skills and the experience of the resources or people that they have in the organization with the strategic direction or the future direction of the business. So when we look at, HR in particular, what they do is they are responsible for creating maybe some sort of a mind map or a structure which basically shows the roles and responsibilities of people of the organization at all levels. So here they will classify them into some sort of a structure, and that structure would be, you have so many workers, you have so many people in junior management, you have so many people in middle management, you have so many people in senior management, you have so many people in board, or maybe at the top level. And each of that level, they describe what kind of roles and responsibilities the people at this level play, and how is it critical for achieving the overall objective of the organization. That is where the HR part becomes important, because they know and they create the job description. So if you have the job description of an individual and you have the overarching objectives which the management decides, then the HR's role is to match those overarching objectives of the board or the direction of the company with the job description, break them down, and then relate the job description of the individual working at that level. So here you will see that one of the key things which HR managers are asked to do are to basically look at creating descriptions of roles at all levels within the organization, and those description of roles then become standard descriptors or kind of procedures through the evaluation at some stage also happens at the end of the year or when the performance appraisal happens. So when you look at, and if I look at just going through one or two points on the slide, it talks about, the HR is responsible for developing programs which enhance overall organizational performance. Now, what does that mean? That if they know that we have a new system or a new, challenge which is going to be faced by the organization, the HR will have a skill set, a complete map of the people's skill set in the organization, and considering that challenge coming into face the organization in maybe 6 months, 1 year time frame, they then put a strategy in place to reskill the workforce so that they are able to better, address that challenge. And that is what it means, that they will put programs in place to enhance and have the people's skills so that they are able to overcome that challenge. Now, when you look at this, the planning part of it starts when the overarching objectives are set by the management. And some part of this has to be done proactively. That means they cannot be seen as a department which is reactive. So do you need training, or do they think that you need training to be able to do that role well? So there's a difference between a proactive and a reactive approach, and most HR departments will look at proactive approach because they have to kind of start to read what is going to happen in the future and keep a close tap on competition, developments happening in the market, changes in the legislation. Some of these things have to be then proactively incorporated into decision-making process so that the companies maybe not face a fine if they're not adhere to a legislation, or in some case they might not want to, be seen that they are kind of being laggards. That means people who are slow to adapt, or organizations slow to adapt to changes happening in the company. That is the example of PT comes in, which then correlates to this point of saying that sometimes organizations have to redesign themselves, or say, for example, reorient themselves from within to be able to better face challenges in the market. So as the gig economy comes in, that means people who work within, the gig economy, that means millions of people who are born after 2000 and are using technology more and more, they have to have the basic essentials of being able to work on PCs, computers, social media. And here is where the HR department has to then look at proactively working to look at the skills which are required to move the organization forward. Now, the last point here, which is sometimes HR also helps in measuring financial results of all activities. Now, how do HR reports look at measuring financial results? So example here would be if you have a compensation package for a CEO, or if you have a compensation package kind of aligned to a particular type of role in the organization. Now, HR's policy, if you imagine this as a scenario that you work within a company which has 50 employees and you're the HR manager. Now, you cannot have a package or a compensation package designed, benefits package designed for 50 employees in 50 different ways. What you have to do as a person working within the human resources department is to create something which is standard, and that can be applied as a grading system to the types or the hierarchy of the employees within the organization. So maybe at the worker level, you define one package, maybe at the junior management, a second type of package, and the middle level, mid-management, and then the senior management. So what you're trying to do here is you're trying to create a tiered system which has a certain amount of process that how people will move from one tier to the second, how the performance will be evaluated, and if they are moving from one, when you say promotions, you're moving from an assistant manager to a manager. Why are you getting that promotion? Some part of that has a direct relation with the financial results or your roles and responsibilities that you complete. It has a financial implication. So if you're moving from a assistant manager to a, that means you're consistently performing on your targets. Those targets are adding to the overall company's goals, and that produces or brings in revenue, and that is a data which human resources department uses to calculate your performance and then accordingly promote you to the next level. So financial results are important because anything that we look at within business, organization, company always has implications on money. And when we look at that implications on money, how much revenue do you bring? Sometimes you hear these statements that we are paying him too much. I don't think he's worth that much money in terms of pay because his results or his contribution to the business is not that much. So these kind of statements when you hear are because when people working within organizations are drawing salaries or are on hefty salaries, but they do not seem to be contributing enough for moving the company forward or achieving the objectives. And that is where HR steps in to look at measuring financial results or performance of that individual or that job role and evaluate whether the person is good enough for the organization or is let go from the organization. Okay. Now, the other thing that we look at, if I just expand that into a chart, which basically says, if these are things that you do again and again on a daily basis as an HR manager, would you not prefer to have this documented as a process or as a procedure or as a strategy rather than having to define them again and again, basically revisit them again and again? So when we look at something which can be, designed as a process or as a thing which occurs again and again, the idea would be the HR has to kind of formalize its processes, and that is where they help in kind of building a strategy or kind of a process which allows them to put one process and apply it to one company. So whether it's the worker, manager, general manager, vice president, or director, that process then could be applied to everyone across the organization. So they have to create something which is like a strategy, and that strategy could be a document which basically talks about a certain set of things which, when required, can just be taken from the book and applied directly to a situation. So when we look at something like that, what most organizations would do is they will look at developing some sort of a document or a set of procedure, and that set of procedure, policy, document would then be classified as something called an HR strategy. And that is something which is followed within the organization in order to either bring a change, bring or achieve certain objectives, to be able to fulfill certain roles and responsibilities, and in some cases, in order to even look at rewarding people when they are able to achieve those milestones set in their job description. So sometimes you will see that people within the HR, they create something called white papers, or they create something which are called documents, and these documents are circulated within different departments. So there could be a document which has been created which says this is a department document strategy, this is a department strategy document. And that is basically a document which aligns business objectives with the HR objectives. So if the marketing, if I take an example say a production company. And here the production manager on the floor has authorization to have 50 workers work on in any shift. If the person who is the manager then requests to get additional workers in the shift, he has to justify why there is a need for additional workers and why cannot he not do with just the 50 workers which are available. Now that document that he produces could have some financial justification, could have some implications in terms of time, that okay, in order for me to achieve this target or meet this target of production of this particular say product, we need more people or there are resources which are required, and he creates a document which is like a justification document of why does he need 5 more workers apart from the 50. The reason when that document is created is, the reason why the document is actually created is to justify the reasons of hiring 5 additional people. And then at that stage, the HR manager will ask him, have you looked at the cost implication? Each worker is going to cost you this X amount in terms of salary, wages, bonus, incentive, and 5, then the board looks at it and then you put a proposal forward. That proposal is either approved or is disapproved, and depending on which the strategy of the, in this case, he would have to implement his strategy. Now, the reason why we look at this breaking up is to understand how sometimes when you put together this document, what are the factors which affect it, and what are the things that you incorporate into this document when you create that policy, procedure, or a strategy. So sometimes what you will see is, if I'm creating an employee handbook, a simple example which I'll do is, the HR manager working in the organization is looking at now creating an employee handbook. Now the employee handbook has lots of various sections in it. He will have, when you are creating one, sometimes you have to put policies. Let's start with, you have to put in things like vision and mission of the organization. Mm-hmm. You look at a message from the CEO or the chief HR officer of the organization, and then you start creating a table of content, which is to put together a lot of documents which will go into the employee handbook. Things like how much pay will you get, how is the pay decided, how is the performance appraisal done, do you get paternity leave, maternity leave, what are the perks and incentives, the do's and don'ts that you have to do, how does the organization look at training and development. So all then become a part and parcel of an employee handbook. And when the HR person is trying to put it together, he has to look at dipping into various reasons of how and why this is required. So one of the, if you have to ask us a few questions and think of a few questions, why do you think a company would require an employee handbook?
Why do I think?
Yeah.
Why do
you think the company or a business would require an employee handbook?
Why? It's very simple. Because they need it as a guide, and for them to know their job description, basically. They need it as a guide to know the rules and regulations of the organization, and for them to know their job description. And where need be, most times you will see you will see some code of conduct there, and you will see some things regarding the organization. So if there's a situation where maybe someone has been queried or something, you can refer to the book to see the rules or the laws abiding to that kind of thing, to see how you can, respond to those things like that. But basically, it serves as a guide for you to know what the organization is about, the objectives, then the job description of each and every worker. That's it.
That's correct. So basically, you've summed it up quite nicely. Is that here the main reason why you create an employee handbook would be to serve as a guide, and that could have all these things which you mentioned, like the code of conduct, the do's and don'ts, the procedures, the policies you want the employee to adhere with, and that particular thing. The need for creating that document arises because as the organization expands, these policies, procedures, code of conduct, whatever you call it, have to be equally understood by each and everyone working within the organization. And this document, when it is put together, also borrows or looks at content and inclusion of content from things like organization, you cannot decide that I will only give 5 days holidays or national holidays to the employee. If all the organization, businesses and the government, public sector organizations have a calendar which observes public holidays, they have to be looked at. And that element, when you look at putting together into the employee handbook, is looking at the external market, based in terms of what is the basic legislation which you have to give in terms of leaves or holidays, and that is looking at external market. Now, when you look at business strategy here, you want each and every employee to follow a code of conduct so that the business is able to achieve the objectives, and that relates to the business strategy. So if the dressing procedure is defined in the employee handbook that you have to be formally on weekdays, but Friday could be a casual Friday, and that looks at the image of the business, maybe relates to what kind of culture or structure of the organization you want to portray outside. Now, it has a lot of things that you put in terms of information, and that information is directly related to the employees or staff of the organization. Things like corporate culture, dress up, time management, or arrival time and dispatch, leaving office opening and closing hours, and how do you represent the organization, part of corporate culture and ethics. Okay. Now, in terms of some parts which we refer to as things like job description and things that you do in a day-to-day basis would be related to your role by reading or compiling the employee handbook. And sometimes what the employee handbook will also do is they will talk about some of the additional features which, as a company, which it provides to its employees, which are not given by the other companies. So you might include things like, as an employee, we took an example of Google. It normally provides more than what other companies provides. Highlight that in the employee handbook is because they want employees to understand that these are benefits or additional perks which are being provided, which the competition in the market does not provide, and that allows them to bring in the best possible talent, attract best possible talent into the organization. So sometimes you put these things into a document like an employee handbook because you want to create a competitive advantage to say, this is how I differentiate my staff working in the organization from another organization's staff. Is that okay? So when we look at some of these roles and responsibilities, they become a part and parcel of a document, and sometimes these documents can come in different shape and form. But the whole idea of having this document is to look at a standardization and look at the the aspect of everyone's understanding on that document being the same. And these documents then are termed as called the HR strategy document, and they relate to the overall organizational strategy. Now, one of the important things that we look at when we understand how HR works, and what their role actually becomes quite critical in the organization, is when some sort of a change is being brought into the organization. You will see that from time to time, as now the world is becoming a global village, it is connected. A lot of companies, businesses, they have branches or have subsidiaries overseas. There, if they have to implement change, the change is one implemented by the HR department. The responsibility is with the HR person to kind of introduce and do that change in a phase-wise fashion. The second thing that you will see is when this has to be done in terms of something new has to be introduced, you will see that sometimes HR will step in to say that when we introduce this change, there should be less, let's put it this way, there should be less disturbance, or it should not have an impact on the productivity of what is happening currently in the organization. So sometimes you will see that they do, an example here would be when a change is being introduced in the organization, they always decide to do it in phases. They will say, if we are changing the office, we will first look at moving the administration department, then we will look at moving the HR department, then we look at moving finance, and the last department in most cases is always the sales or the marketing one, because they do not want the departments to be affected which are generating revenue or looking at bringing revenue to the organization. So sometimes this planning for the change has to be done in such a way that it creates very disruption in the organization during the transition process or during this change process. So when we understand this change and how this is introduced, we need to understand the 4 P's of change, which are important from a human resources perspective. The first P that we look at is something called purpose. Now, it is human nature that we always challenge and ask for what is the reason why we want to do this change. What is the background for bringing this change? I'm happy with the current situation. I'm happy with the current things that are there. I'm happy with my job role. Why do you think I need to change? So these are basic questions which sometimes you get to ask, or HR managers get asked when they look at, defining the purpose of why this change is being introduced. And in most cases, most employees would want to know, how does this change affect me? So if you're looking at moving office, for example, a lot of people would feel that, okay, the office is moving, that's fine, but how does it affect me? Does it change my traveling time? Does it change my, opening or, working hours in the organization, because now it's going to be outside the city, or the office is going to be slightly, more closer to, say, the airport. So you look at those things wherein the purpose has to be clearly looked at in terms of why, how it will accomplish, the change which is being brought, and finally, how does that logic then settle with the employee? So other 4 P's that we talk about is the picture is the P. Why is this change coming? What is the end game, as they call it? Why did we introduce this change? Like UK is leaving the European Union. So what is the bigger picture? The bigger picture is that by the time we end up leaving the European Union, there will be a lot of changes which will come in things like labor legislation, labor laws, immigration, for example, banking, and these changes would then have to be implemented when we are leaving the European Union. We are no longer a part of the single market. So what is the bigger picture? Sometimes people end up asking, I voted for, a change. I voted for Brexit. But, what is the bigger picture? What are we going to get because of this? Do we get more money coming into the UK? Do we have more local decision making happening? And those kind of things are then required to be looked at when we look at the bigger picture. So here, from a perspective, sometimes when you look at doing the changes, the idea is people will ask question about, will it help save cost? Will it help increase productivity? Will it help bring in more efficiency? What could be the benefit and opportunities that you will get if we do the change? And those are the questions that you tend to ask, which are related to, the picture within the 4 P's. Sometimes you look at also things like plan, because if you have decided to bring change, like there is a change happening in the pay structure of the people within the organization. Now, when we had the financial crisis from 2008 to 2014-15, a lot of organizations did not decide, basically deferred the pay rises in the sector. And the reason why that was done was because these were people working within the public sector, they cannot be made redundant, unlike the private organizations which had the opportunity to lay off a lot of workers, saying that, okay, the business is declining. In order to make sure that we do not get into loss or get into, red, some organizations kind of decided to do away with employees within various departments and said, okay, because the business is less, the workload is less, we can get rid of some of the employees. So here there was a plan which was put in place with some timeline to say that, okay, if we are going to, reduce the headcount or ask people to leave, then we need to have a structured plan. Otherwise, it would have led to losses or, lawsuits from employees saying that I've been unfairly dismissed, or, in this case, the company has taken me out because of this reason, which is not correct. And, in order to avoid those lawsuits, what they do is then look at a plan that they calculate things like what is the, notice period which the employee has. If we have to lay off so many workers, what is the overall budget which the company will end up spending, because you'll still have 1, 3 months, 6 months notice. And in those cases, sometimes the organizations ask you to go, they pay you some garden leave. They continue to pay you, but you are on garden leave. That means you cannot work for any other employer, but you are, not working for the present one. And under obligations of legislation and how the contract was signed, you are obliged to stay at home and they will pay you for it. But you cannot go because reasons of confidentiality or clause within your contract employment saying that even if you leave the job because you can carry certain trade secrets to competitors, you're not allowed to work in the same sector for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, depending on how big the organization is. So plans have to be put in place, and they relate to timelines, they relate to key milestones, what will help us do. So sometimes the CEO will ask, okay, we can lay off so many employees, but what is the end goal? What is it going to help us achieve? It is going to help us achieve savings in terms of mega savings like billions of dollars in terms of salary costs, wages costs. Is it going to help make the organization nimble and strong? So these are questions which are asked when we see 4 Ps of change. And the last part will be part. What is my part going to be in the change? How will you be involved? How will your role change? So this is about we instead of we. This is about primarily you. How is it going to be effective, and how are you going to be directly affected by this? So this particular model that we study has also over the years changed to something called the 5P model, and sometimes people call it the 5P model of HR. And this is something which was introduced by Armstrong, and it talks about the philosophy, policies, programs, practices, and also the processes. So I put that in the speaker note here for you to look at, and these 5 Ps essentially are the reason why organizations look at putting change in place within the organization. So sometimes the philosophy of the organization changes, and this is seen from an example that your new CEO which comes and he is maybe more risk-taking and more proactive. You will see the whole philosophy of the organization changes because he focuses everything on productivity, focuses everything on goal achievement. So if you achieve the goal, you get more incentive, more perks, more salary, more wages. So this is where sometimes you will see at a higher level the change in philosophy looks at making the organization more aggressive or more competitive as compared to what they've been doing for a number of years, because this change is instrumental at the topmost level and is done primarily from a philosophical perspective. Then you will also look at things like policies, programs. Sometimes policies in the companies change. They decide that, okay, we're not going to hire so many people. We're going to hire a flexible workforce, people who are going to work part-time for us, and they're going to work, through contractors or, suppliers. So that's a change which is primarily because of the policy change or the change in business, which is meant a change in policy and meant a change for the company. So this model is quite important, and most people, and if I give you an example of how this is put into place, is that when you look at the year end, most HR departments will do something called performance appraisal. Now, when they do the performance appraisal, change of roles. Sometimes you will see that people are switched between different roles. They are saying, okay, you've been working in this role for too many years now, and we'll give you a job rotation or a replacement, and you will go and do this particular function. And this is done primarily because they look at those 5 Ps to bring across that change in the organization or in that department. So they will say, okay, this department, continues to support the, main functions of sales and marketing, but because the output is not coming out, what they decide to do is make tweaks in the program, in the department, by basically looking at tweaks in the 5 Ps. That means they will look at the basic change in terms of philosophy, why the department exists. They will look at things like what are the policies and procedures which will, help people adapt to that change. And then at some stage, what they will do is they'll put some processes and policies in place which will help people move on that change, or kind of move from A position to a B position. And that is looked at from a point of view of this particular model of 4P of HRM. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Now, going back to something which was organizational strategy before we look at Levin's model. Now, there are 4 or 5 reasons why an HR strategy document is put together. One is, at some stage, you want to look at what will be the overall performance. It's like saying the GDP of a country. If I have to add up the output or the wages of all the people working within the 33 million, it adds up to a GDP or the gross domestic product of the country as $2.6 trillion. Now, the why you want to get that perspective is you want to understand that if everybody works within this country and you have 35 million people who work, what is the overall output of the country in terms of money or the revenue it generates? And that is what classifies countries into in terms of thinking like you're the 5th largest economy or you're the 3rd largest economy or the 7th largest economy. Because what they've done is they put together all the salaries of all the working individuals, combine them into one figure, and that gives you what is called the gross domestic product. Now, sometimes you will see that if organizations have to bring across change, if they have to bring across change with regards to moving the organization into one particular direction, in this case, what you will see is that is where companies would look at bringing across a change, in order to move forward. And that, if I explain, would be from the point of view of let's understand, like let's understand the definition of why change needs to be done. Can you think of 1 or 2 reasons why do you think sometimes organizations look at bringing change?
Okay. Like they said, that change is a natural phenomenon. The only reason why there will be changes in an organization is when maybe the HR manager or the managers themselves see a loophole that needs to be covered in the organization. So there will be need for changes, and there will be need for how do I call this? Different new set of rules.
Correct.
And that's what brings changes, because if there's something wrong in an organization, it needs to be fixed. Like maybe when, for instance, let me just give. Sorry?
Spot on. So when you need something to be fixed in the organization, you need to bring a change. You think this is not happening, this is not working, then you have to try a different approach. And that kind of different approach requires you to work on the methodology or the change to bring across a change. If the organization is not performing, if the revenue is not growing, if the people are not achieving, then there is something fundamentally wrong, which is where change has to be brought in, something different to be done. So when you look at that in general, what basically this person Kurt Levin did back in the 1940s was that he came across with a particular terminology, which is saying that when organizations try to bring in change, in most cases, they have to basically changing the name of the business, maybe the type of the business, or in some cases the people within the business. So there are 2 types of things why he identified 2 variables, and these 2 variables was that sometimes when things are not going right, what you have to look at is you have to look at how things are being done, and the second is who is doing these things. So what that meant basically was that what was happening in the business in terms of the nature, and the other was who was working within the business, which is the people. And he came across with this particular model, which basically has a 3-step model in terms of unfreeze, change, and then refreeze. That means he meant that sometimes you go through the phase of introducing change, but this phase is a 3-step process, and this 3-step process essentially looks at understanding why the change is required first, and that could be done, which is in the mode called unfreezing mode. That means organization is still open to understanding why this is a problem and how, and identifying the issues which are causing that problem. So here you determine what is called the needs, why you need to change. You look at do you have adequate resources within, it could be people in different hierarchy of the organization, and after when you introduce this change, what are the things which will help you work through this change. So this stage was called unfreeze. And then when you do the physical change or the implementation of the change, you start looking at things like you communicate, you dispatch basically rumors, which is create a plan, and that plan then looks at, putting into action the phases or the steps through which this change is to be brought. And then once the change has happened in the organization, what you do is, in order for this mistake or this issue to not arise again, what you do is you do kind of something called the refreeze. That means once the changes have been done, you refreeze that into saying that, okay, now this is what we used to do previously, now this is what we do now, and that is the process going forward. There is no reference to the old process. So what you then tend to do is, a simple example in the house, what you see with your kids is that sometimes, you want your kids to come in from the school and do the homework or study, and they don't do it. So what you do is, it's not working. You've tried tuition classes and things like that, but it's not working. So what you then take is, you take hold of the situation and say, I think I need to do something in terms of a drastic change because this doesn't seem to be working. And now, because it's not seem to be working, what you do is you analyze and recap what are the things or factors which have brought across this change of this process is not working. So it could be that they are more tired when they come back from school, they are more interested in, they are hungry. Yeah, so that is it. And then once you identify those issues, what you then do is you go about putting in some new things or processes or changes, and those things, when implemented properly, would allow you to bring that. So when they come in, first thing, give them a glass of milk or give them support. They're re-energized, they have the energy. Then you ask them to sit down and do the work, and then once they've done it, you allow them to go out and play. So similarly, within the organizations, these stages are identified, and in the first stage, what you do is you do the preparation for change, the change planning, or the preparation to be required to be done to process change in the organization. You basically look at communication, you explain the reasons why this is being done, so that you get buy-in from the staff or buy-in from resources, for bringing that change. And in the change phase, you basically talk about, how will the benefits of this, what are the benefits which are going to be there when you implement this change. You talk about things which will be basically giving a new direction, and you invite participation from staff to be able to come in and work and work with the company to bring this change. And once this has been brought in, what you tend to do is you take away those measures. I can think of, I give you another example. Imagine you are working within the highway maintenance, want to maintain or repair a certain section of the highway. Now, how would the project manager go about it? The project manager would go about it in the sense that they would seek permissions, do all that. There's an identification done that the potholes in the side of the motorway or the highway needs to be repaired. So what they start to do before they start repairing is they make some preparations, get the budget approvals in place, and then the on-site equipment starts arriving. Then they start cordoning off the section of the road to allow for this repair to happen. And then at some stage, all the machinery and everything rolls in, and the process actually starts. So you get some notice board, being put up that work here starts from such and such date and finishes on such and such date, which is to do expectation building. The people who commute from that location on a daily basis, that okay, 2 weeks down the line there is some major changes which are going to happen, and there is some repair works which are going to start, and that will take 1 week. So you're building expectation with the consumers or commuters who go from that location. At some stage it starts. Once it starts, barriers and all those things are taken away, and the road is then opened up, or the highway is then opened up as usual. Public. Similarly, when you bring in change within the organization, you have to go through these 3 phases. Make communication first, explain the benefits, usages, problems, why this change is being brought in. At some stage, you start a phase-wise delivery of change. And then once the change has been done, you go back to the normal, that, okay, there are no restrictions now. And, all this change has been possible because of the participation of employees. And everybody has played their bit to be able to, ensure that this is implemented smoothly. And that then looks at celebrating or, kind of going back to the normal in terms of this model. So this is where Levin's model comes in, and he's one of the person who actually proposed this in 1940s. So when HR looks at bringing change into the organization, they look at doing so by implementing or consciously or unconsciously implementing and going through these 3 phases so that the change introduced is effective, is permanent, and is able to bring across the benefits of why this change was being introduced. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
When you introduce change, there is something called a change curve that we look at, and anything that you do always follows a particular, let's put it this way, some sort of a cycle or some sort of a, let's put it this way. When I say it goes through some sort of a process, so when this particular change being introduced, even on a personal self. Let's look at this as an example before we go on to understand this model, and I'll send you a bit of a handout. Now, Clubbers and Ross, there were 2 people who actually looked at understanding that because it is related to human resources or people, change sometimes is not same as when it is done for other resources. It could be plant and machinery. You could just ask somebody to move them from one location to the other, and there is no change. They do not have that emotional contact or that touch. So these are inanimate objects, finances, for example, physical resources, plant and machinery. These are resources which cannot react to change. If you take a decision that I want to move money from one bank to the other, just go ahead and do it. Money does not have a mind of its own to feel bad about it or good about it. Similarly, when you look at infrastructure, there is no repercussion that you face from a point of view of emotional attachment. But in the case of human resources, what tends to happen is that Kluber and Ross, when they did this study, they basically found out that if people are asked to change or asked to adapt to a change, they go through 5 different phases of before they 5 different phases before they start accepting this change, or before they are kind of more aligned to accept this change. And these 5 phases were actually defined in the change curve, for individuals. If I have to look at a personal situation or a situation wherein an example is, if you had, say, for example, if you've lost somebody quite close to you, when I say that you've lost a member of your family which was very close to you, you go through some different experiences when you've lost a person very close to you. You go through a phase and you are quite angry. Why did this happen to me? Or what has happened and I wasn't responsible. You go through some phases of anger, phases wherein you are depressed, phases which you kind of think of that you're not able to face the reality, and then after a point in time you're able to kind of come back to normal, isn't it?
Yes, after growth.
So when you look at humans, when we look at people in particular within the organization, if you try and implement change, they go through certain phases of expressions or certain phases of let's put it this way, acceptance or not accepting that change. And this is then described in the form of something called the Kluber-Ross 5-stage model change curve. And they predicted that when change is brought across in an organization, some people kind of clearly say that I do not like the change. They deny it. They basically do not accept. They say, okay, I'm not going to accept this change because this is not related to me, and they deny it. Now, at some stage, over a point in time, it could be training, development, counseling that you do, or the HR does, or the department manager speaks to you. You then start to, come out of that denial stage, but you have a bit of anger, and you are not completely buying that idea that this change is going to help me or help the way I do the work in the organization. You are angry, but at some stage, you also, then decide, okay, I have no other option. And if I do not accept this change, I have to be leaving the organization, or I'll end up leaving, the company. But some people, they accept change. Even after accepting the change, they are not able to cope with the work. And what it does is they go into some sort of depression. So sometimes you will see that, okay, my manager is not listening to me. He listens to other people. Every suggestion I give, doesn't kind of strike a chord with him. And because he doesn't care what I say, you are continuing to be in the organization, you continue to work, but you get stage where you are depressed, that, I do not get rewarded for my things that I do or initiatives that I do. And that is where you get into a depression stage. Now, at some stage, some people which work within the organization are smart enough and they are able to bargain. So this stage was called bargaining because he felt that some people who are able to understand the situation, they are able to benefit from the employer by bargaining, saying that, okay, if you're going to bring this change, this is going to affect me, maybe I'll have to travel quite a lot, or office is going to be in a different location, which would mean that I will need more time to travel or budget for it. So they are able to negotiate with the HR and then get favorable benefits towards themselves. And once they get these benefits, they are not reluctant to accept change. They are the ones which embrace change. That they say, okay, I've got what I wanted. I'm happy with it. So it doesn't matter. I will accept what they are saying. So basically, this was a 5-stage cycle that they said that, sometimes you will see people go through when they are not willing to accept change or they are willing to accept change. They go through these 5 stages. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we see this as an example on a daily basis with our kids at home. Sometimes you ask them to do something, they do not do it. They are totally in denial. Can you do your homework? No, they are not even listening. At some stage, you will say there is a bit of an anger. They come into a stage wherein they say, okay, I can't do this, or I need help. And then once they have done that, you do a bit of bargaining with them. Okay, if you finish your work, I'll give you this. Or if you do this, you'll get that. And they start to accept that change, start getting into a bit of work. And at some stage, they are able to accomplish. So these are stages that you go through when you look at changes that are introduced by human resources or changes which are introduced by HR department for staff or people in the organization. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Now, what I'm going to do is at this stage, this will be the last bit that I cover because this is quite detailed and then covers the whole of unit. So we are looking at the last bit in terms of understanding, how do we look at understanding what are the professional ethics or principles on which the organization works and how does it relate to HR. Now, the code of conduct that you initially mentioned, there is a code of conduct in every organization. And when I look at the code of conduct in every organization, this code of conduct relates to, how the organization functions, how the organization actually works. And to a certain extent, this code of conduct is expected from, the person when they work for the company. So, and the reason why this code of conduct is expected is because at some stage, you are expecting the individual to behave in a certain manner and then adhere to policies and procedures to portray an image of the organization. So, in this case, this then becomes something called the, ethics which the organization expects from you. Professional ethics, sometimes you call them, or in some cases you say that, if you work and represent us as a company, when we give you the responsibility, you have to kind of, adhere to certain of these morals and ethics when you work and you have sensitive information. So people within the organization at different structures, you will see, have to have ethics and morals because they have access to different form of information. So sometimes you will see managers at the senior level have a lot of pressure because of the work they do, and that pressure then needs, because they take up more responsibility, let me say, not pressure, they take up more responsibility and a larger role, they have access to more information. And that information can create a certain amount of pressure within them, on them primarily to contain that information. Like if you have information related to company's profits, for example, or if you have information related to the salaries of employees. So if you work as a department manager and you have, say, 5 people reporting to you, you will have access to the information which is in terms of which employee gets paid, how much, what is their bonus, the contract information and things like that. So here, when you look at that, sometimes, managers in that position have to have professional ethics to maintain that information, hold on to that information, and then use it at the right stages or, use it at the right time to be able to, get work done. Sometimes they say, you will hear a sentence which says you are privy to this information. That means you are a select few who have access to this information. And that access to the information the pressure on you that, okay, you are the few who have access, but that also means that you cannot disclose this information onto others unless you've been asked to do so. So in such cases, the principles of ethics and morality come in when you look at HR drawing up agreements, and these could be things like non-disclosure agreements. Have you heard about a non-disclosure agreement?
I didn't get that.
Okay, sometimes you see that when information has to be shared, you will come across a term, something called, which is NDA, non-disclosure agreement.
Which means you don't have to disclose it to the public
That is correct.
outside of the organization. It has to be within.
That is correct. So sometimes what you will see is when you sign your employment contract, it is clearly mentioned that you are not going to discuss the contents of this contract with anybody else apart from your manager. These things are considered confidential, and they are related to something called ethics of functioning within the organization. So sometimes you will see that organizations will ask you to adhere to professional ethics because this information that you get access to is important information and cannot be shared unless you're authorized. So look at that. Some you will see how to look at these professional standards. These ethics and professional standards from an HR manager's point are things like equality and diversity. That means as an HR manager, you have the power to recruit people depending on the requirements, but you cannot have the bias to recruit a particular type of person. You have to be equal, and you have to be fair in doing recruitment. So one of the key things that you are asked to look at as an HR manager that you are going to be adhering to or sticking to an equality and diversity policy. That means you are committed to hiring people which are and there is no discrimination when you hire people or you're asked to hire people. Right? Sometimes you will also be asked to look at maintaining ethics about when you look at hiring people, you're not going to be disproportionate or discriminate against paying a certain salary. Sometimes you will see in organizations, people say that, okay, I've been able to hire so many resources and I've brought a bit of saving to the organization because I've negotiated a package on which the employee is happy joining the organization. So if the budget sanction was, say, $10,000 and you've hired somebody $8,000, you have been slightly disproportionate because the budget actually set aside by the organization was $10K, but you've managed to hire an employee $8K. Now, this could be seen as two things. One, you've been a good HR manager because you've negotiated and you have brought the budget down. But the other hand, it could be seen as that you've kind of discriminated by not paying the employee having the experience, the relevant salary, and that is where, again, the ethics come in. So when you look at the pay gender gap between men and women nowadays, this is being fought under the ethical principles of equitable pay and reward. If you do the same job and you are in the same department and a colleague of yours also does the same job and they are in the same department, then why is there a difference in the pay? Why are you not paid, same? So this is related to equity and reward. Okay?
Okay.
These types of things that...
Can I say something, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I noticed that in some companies recently or some organizations, when they want to recruit, during the interview, the oral interview, they might ask you how much you would want to be earning. Now, when you give an amount, it's not like they don't have a clue of how much they want to be paying you, but they want to hear something from you. So when you call an amount, they beat it so low, and you people now start negotiating. Now, if you negotiate, at some point, they will tell you they will get back to you. But now, when you now get employed eventually, when you're hired, some people will tell you that they realize that this, people in their department, that they do the same work, some people are paid better than them.
Yes.
The person they just hired, the new person they just hired, is even earning more than the old staff.
Yes.
And I begin to ask myself why that is, because there should be a stipulated salary for a particular post. So why is it changing that you're working with someone and the person is earning, you're doing the same job, but the person earns more than you? Eventually, they will now tell you that the person negotiated better than you, that you settled for less.
I agree. So this is where the principles of ethics are now becoming important within modern day organizations, because these issues are now no longer being brushed under the carpet. They are being discussed openly. So sometimes, and what you've given is a very good example of how this is actually seen in organizations when they shy away from having the discussion with you on the salary, or they shy away with having a discussion with you in terms of what is fair and what is not fair. So as 21st century modern HR managers, this is now covered as a major issue, that if they appoint or take or hire somebody within a position which has the responsibility to hire people and employees, you are kind of like a sworn, you're asked to take a sworn oath, or you're asked to basically go through these policies and procedures so that when you implement them for the organization, you are seen to be fair, you are seen to be equal, and you are not using the power or position of authority to abuse this power. Okay? So these are all covered under what is called the ethical issues in HR. And this is what we are actually studying, is that as an HR manager, you are responsible for not only ensuring that you follow these principles of ethic, but also see the implementation of these happening within the organization. So sometimes you will see that a lot of factory workers which work together in a particular shift, they can have a differentiation in their pay, but the differentiation in the pay has to be linked to a document which describes why this differentiation is. So a worker who's joining today might join at, say, £7 an hour, but somebody who's been working for 8 years has been over the years getting a rise, maybe some rise in pennies or whatever, but that pay for that worker who's worked in the same role after 10 years is maybe £10, but a new worker joins at £7. But there's a logic behind how that pay increase has happened, and that's been defined in the document. So ethically, person doing the same job, having more experience, is getting paid slightly higher than the person joining in that job on a new basis is likely having a lesser pay. That is defined by a document, and that is ethical HR. But unethical would be if you take two new workers and one joins at £7 an hour and doing the same work, has no experience, and the other joining at £8 an hour doing the same work because you've seen that as a person favorable, or that person has come across more favorable to you during the interview. So those are ethical issues which HR managers have to adhere to ensure that they are able to implement the law and legislation when they are in position of authority equally across all employees, all departments, in all places they do recruitment. This is just an example of recruitment. It can be for compensation also, when you put together salary packages, or when they put together a salary package, benefits package for each type of employee. And that is where the grading comes in. So you're at grade 1, you're at grade 2, or sometimes in organizations you have a classification where you're a worker in junior management, middle management, senior management, and the board. So you'll have compensation which will be similar to the people working in that level. And that is where ethical issues of HR comes in. When you do performance appraisal, when you look at sharing of data, or when you look at other issues which are related to equality, diversity, health and safety, and these are issues which have to be taken into account when you look at ethical issues. Another example which you've said, and I will quote, which is sometimes when you see people have employees. So what they do is, the first thing which HR managers will do is they will save the ones that they are closer to, or the ones which are favorite. But they will lay off other workers who are not favorite or do not get on with the manager well. Isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is where ethics come into places, because as an HR manager or as a person having the responsibility, you have to look at evaluating situation, on an even platform. And if you've been asked to get rid of 10 employees in a department, then you have to do an independent assessment and evaluation for each of the employees, and on a merit basis, choose the ones which are the worst or the ones which the company needs to get rid of. You can't play any favoritism in that. You can't have, I know him well, or he's been a good worker for a number of years, or he's been loyal to the organization. No, those factors have to be applied equally across everybody to take that decision. And that is where the professional ethics come into play when you look at the HR role. Okay?
Yes.
Now, this is where we will stop for today, because I think what we've done is we've covered the first learning outcome. And the first learning outcome basically, is here, which talks about the role of human resources function. And in this, we've covered responsibilities. We've looked at how change is brought about and what is the difference and what is the reason why HR people adhere to some professional ethics within an organization, and what are the areas in which they have to look at agreeing to these ethical principles.
Okay.
And I will send you some 2 handouts which are related to this. One is on change model.
Hello?
There are no models. Yeah.
Okay, I think that you're breaking. You said something now.
What I said is, after the session, I'm going to send you 1 or 2 handouts. One of the handouts that I'm going to send you will be for change management or change models of change management which HR people use in the organization, because there are a couple of models that we have to look at to understand this from a theoretical perspective. So we have discussed maybe the Levins model, but there are 1 or 2 other models that I will also send you a handout of.
Okay.
And the other would be a handout to discuss in detail the HR responsibilities related to specific functions. So one could be recruitment selection, one could be training and development. So that will be a bit of a handout which will look at explaining the roles and responsibilities of HR in relation to organizational objectives.
Okay.
Okay. Now for next week, so that we can align the session now, can you tell me 2 days which are convenient for us to do the sessions next week? So I can send out the invite now.
Okay. Maybe Tuesday, Wednesday. I should be available Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
So can I fix then Wednesday and Thursday next week for the 2 sessions, same time?
Okay, sure.
That's fine. So what I will do is I'll send you the invites for this after the session now. And the other thing would be, I will also try and send you, send you the feedback on your first assignment.
Okay, please. I would appreciate that. Yes, I want to say something about, I don't know, are we done with the class yet?
Yeah, we've done with the class, yes.
Yes, about the assignment, I went to my profile and I realized that I